A 24-year-old nurse shouted into the dark night, "Stop hurting him." In her hand, she held only her phone, its flashlight cutting through the shadows. Her fingers trembled, but that one bold act saved a man she didn't even know, a man who turned out to be a billionaire. The city was winding down for the night. Shops dimmed their lights, cafés wiped their final tables, and the hum of distant traffic softened into a kind of urban lullaby. It was just past 7 p.m. Late, but not too late for a city that never fully slept. Ava Morgan walked with tired but steady steps, the soft tap of her sneakers echoing faintly against the sidewalk. A 24-year-old trauma nurse with a stubborn heart and a no-nonsense ponytail, she had just wrapped a 12-hour shift at Jude Memorial. Her scrub top was wrinkled, her shoulders ached, and all she really wanted was a long shower and something warm to eat. But fate doesn't check the clock. As she passed a narrow alley between two brick buildings, a sharp sound made her stop. A muffled groan. Painful. Human. Ava paused, turning her head slightly. Most would have kept walking, kept their eyes forward. But Ava's instincts, honed by too many emergencies and not enough rest, made her turn back. She stepped closer to the alley's edge, the light from the street lamps barely reaching the shadows beyond. And there, just barely visible, was a man slumped on the ground. Not alone. Two figures stood over him, dark shapes against the fading light, their postures threatening, their movements deliberate. A chill slid down Ava's spine. Her voice caught for a moment, heart thudding. But hesitation was not in her nature. She reached for her phone with one hand and activated the flashlight with the other. The beam cut clean through the gloom. "Hey," she shouted, her voice sharp, clear. "What are you doing?" The two men flinched as the light hit them, one raising an arm to shield his face. For a beat, no one moved. Then curses broke the silence. "Stupid girl," one of them snarled. "You shouldn't have seen this." They turned, quick as shadows, sprinting toward the far end of the alley. One of them glanced back, and Ava caught a glimpse of his face, scarred, cruel, dangerous. His voice carried in the wind like a warning. "We'll find you," he growled. "You'll regret this." And then they were gone. Ava stood frozen for half a second, heart jackhammering in her chest, the light in her hand trembling. Then she ran to the fallen man. "Sir, can you hear me?" No response, only a low groan. Up close, she saw blood at his temple and his designer coat torn across the chest. He looked out of place here, older, elegant, but broken in a way that made her breath catch. She dropped to her knees beside him, fumbling for her phone. 911, what's your emergency? The voice crackled. "This is Ava Morgan," she said quickly, trying to steady her voice. "I found a man unconscious in an alleyway off 6th and Alder. He's been attacked. I think he's bad, but breathing. We need help. Now." Minutes later, the red and blue flash of an ambulance lit the alley walls. Paramedics took over, lifting the man with practiced care. But Ava didn't walk away. She followed. At the hospital, she stayed nearby, quietly checking on his condition. When he regained consciousness hours later, she was the first person he saw. "You saved me," he rasped, his voice gravel in gratitude. "Just doing what anyone should," she replied. Before he was discharged the next day, she brought him water, spoke with his doctor, and made sure he'd be okay once he left. It was only then he asked for her name properly. "Ava Morgan," she said, offering a shy smile. "I'm Alexander," he replied. He didn't mention his last name. They exchanged contact details. No grand promises, just a quiet understanding. The next morning, he left. And so did she. Neither of them knew yet how fate had only just begun to write their story. The sun had just begun to dip beneath the horizon when Ava stepped out of her apartment. The sky was soaked in gold and fading pinks, the kind of soft twilight that made the city feel gentle for once. She adjusted her coat, smoothing the front of her blouse with one nervous hand. It wasn't a date, not really. But it felt like something delicate. A thread connecting two people who didn't know they needed one another yet. Alexander Quinn had invited her to dinner. It had come through a polite, neatly worded message 2 days after the alley encounter. "Would you allow me the pleasure of dinner sometime this week? I'd really like to thank you properly. No pressure. Just gratitude, and maybe a little good wine, if you're into that kind of thing. Hey, you." She'd stared at it for almost 10 minutes before typing back. "Just dinner. No fanfare. I'm not great at being made a fuss over." "Ava," he replied instantly. "Understood." 7 p.m. Lamartell. Casual dress. I've already reserved the quietest corner of the place. P.S. You deserve a little fuss, Ava Morgan. Now, walking through the stone pathway to Lamartell, a tucked-away, amber-lit French restaurant nestled between ivy-covered townhouses. Ava felt the curious flutter of anticipation that had nothing to do with fine dining. The host greeted her with the kind of reverence that felt disproportionate, but she was too distracted to question it. He led her to a private alcove at the back of the restaurant where a table for two awaited. The man sitting at it stood immediately when he saw her. Alexander Quinn. She almost didn't recognize him in the warm glow of the candlelight. Gone was the pale, bruised stranger from the hospital. Tonight, he looked rested, his tailored charcoal blazer crisp against a black shirt, his salt and pepper hair swept back with quiet elegance. And yet, his smile was the same one she remembered from the moment he opened his eyes and whispered, "You saved me." "You came," he said softly. "I said I would," Ava replied, sliding into the seat he pulled out for her. He sat down across from her and gave a small, grateful sigh. "I wasn't sure you would. Because I'm the kind of person who stares down two muggers in a dark alley but is scared of a free dinner." He chuckled, genuinely. "Exactly." The waiter appeared with a bottle of red and two crystal glasses. Ava raised an eyebrow. "You didn't even ask what I like." "I asked the hospital staff. One of the nurses said you whispered Cabernet in your sleep on a 12-hour night shift." Her lips parted in amused disbelief. "You're a stalker." "I'm thorough." They clinked glasses and settled into the hum of the restaurant. Music drifted softly in the background, something with violins and longing. At first, they talked about the alley, about fear, about how strange it was that such a brutal moment had stitched their lives together. But soon the conversation wandered, to books, to why Ava had chosen nursing, to how Alexander preferred walking in the rain over running in the sun. "I've never liked crowds," he admitted. "Which is ironic, considering how many people work for me." "I get that," Ava said. "When I'm in a trauma unit with 5 people bleeding out, I'm calm. Put me in a birthday party and I forget how to breathe." Alexander grinned. "So we're both emotionally backward. Good to know." By the time dinner arrived, salmon with citrus glaze for her, filet mignon for him, the walls between them had quietly dissolved. Ava had learned that Alexander once studied poetry before business consumed his life. He learned that Ava had a twin brother she rarely saw, and that she'd wanted to be a firefighter until she fainted during a drill at age 13. Their laughter came easily, not forced. And somewhere between the first bite and the last sip, the shadows of the alley began to fade, not forgotten, but repurposed into the roots of something new. Still, as they lingered over dessert, chocolate mousse with mint, Ava put her spoon down and leaned back. "I need to say something before this becomes too nice," she said. Alexander tilted his head. "Too nice." She nodded. "You've said thank you at least 5 times tonight. You opened a car door for me, pulled out my chair, picked a place with impossible reservations, and served perfect wine. And I appreciate it. Really. But I didn't do what I did for a reward." He studied her, eyes steady. "I know that. I did it because it was the right thing to do. You were hurt. Anyone would have helped." "I don't think that's true," Alexander said, his voice low and serious now. "A lot of people walk past dark alleys. You didn't. You saw something terrible, and you ran toward it instead of away. That's not ordinary." Ava looked down, fiddling with her napkin. "Maybe not. But I still don't want a pedestal." "Then how about a friendship?" he asked gently. "No expectations. No gold-plated thank you notes. Just connection." She looked up, met his gaze, and saw the sincerity there. "No walls. No games." She smiled. "I could live with that." They left the restaurant side by side, the night folding around them in quiet comfort. Outside, a black car waited to take Alexander home. He opened the door but paused, hand resting on the edge, eyes lingering on her face. "Text me when you get home," he said. "Only if you do the same," Ava replied. He nodded once, a subtle promise. And then he was gone. Far from the soft lights and shared smiles of Lamartell, another kind of night unfolded. The warehouse was tucked behind a shipping yard, cold steel walls, concrete floors, and a long table surrounded by tension. The air smelled of gasoline, metal, and resentment. 3 men stood before the one seated in the shadows. The man who spoke first had a bandaged hand, the one Ava had illuminated in the alley. "She saw us," he muttered, voice thick with failure. "Lit us up like a flare. He got away. Again." the seated figure said flatly. The voice was clipped, refined, but full of venom. "I don't care about your excuses, Dylan. Or yours, Reese," the man said, leaning forward just enough for the single hanging light bulb to catch the edge of his jawline. Sharp, clean-shaven, ruthless. His name was Mark Renshaw, known to the public as a venture capitalist, philanthropist, and respected titan of innovation. But to those in the inner circles of power, he was a tactician with the moral compass of a viper. And tonight, he was seething. "He should have been dead in that alley," Mark hissed. "I gave you everything you needed. The perfect route, the gaps in his security. Hell, I even paid off a surveillance blind zone. And yet, he lives. Because of a nurse with a flashlight?" The third man cleared his throat. "We didn't expect interference. We thought it'd be clean." Mark stood now, slow and deliberate. He walked around the table, each step echoing in the warehouse like a judge pacing his chamber. "I don't want thoughts," he said. "I want results." Alexander Quinn was supposed to disappear quietly. No headlines. No suspicion. And instead, he's dining in Midtown with some Florence Nightingale knockoff like nothing ever happened. He paused, glaring at the men. "I gave you a job. You failed." A long silence followed. Then Mark turned to Dylan. "Give me everything on her." "Who?" "The nurse. Ava Morgan." Mark's lips twisted into something almost serpentine. "If she's in his life now, she becomes leverage." The morning began like any other, unremarkable, slow, and quietly gray. The kind of morning that slips through the cracks, unnoticed, until something suddenly goes wrong. Lucia Vesquez arrived at St. Jude Memorial Hospital a few minutes before 7 a.m., her usual time. She had a coffee cup in one hand and her ID badge swinging from the other. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly as she made her way past the reception, exchanging sleepy smiles with familiar faces. The ER was waking up, the scent of antiseptic and fresh coffee in the air. Nurses were already moving from one bed to another, and the day shift was slowly replacing the night. But one thing was off. Ava Morgan wasn't there. Lucia noticed right away. Ava always arrived early, usually with a second cup of coffee for her or a sarcastic comment about morning rounds. Her absence felt strange, hollow. At first, Lucia chalked it up to traffic or maybe a late alarm. She waited a few more minutes, then casually pulled out her phone. No texts, no updates, no calls. She sent a message. "Where are you? The place is chaos and I refuse to cover your patients." 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Lucia called. The first ring went unanswered. The second sent her straight to voicemail. Her unease thickened. She tried again, twice. Nothing. By the time the hour turned, and Ava still hadn't shown up, the worry had transformed into panic. Lucia dropped everything, made a vague excuse to the charge nurse, and left the hospital in a rush, her gut in knots. The walk to Ava's apartment wasn't far. The streets outside were damp from last night's rain, and early sunlight peeked between buildings as she hurried through crosswalks and alley turns. She was praying, muttering silently under her breath, asking the universe to let this be a misunderstanding. But as soon as she reached Ava's third-floor apartment on Cedar Row, she knew something was wrong. The door was open, slightly ajar. Not enough to draw attention, but enough to raise alarm in someone who knew Ava. Lucia paused at the threshold. "Ava," she called, voice cracking. There was no answer. She pushed the door fully open. Inside, the room looked frozen mid-motion. A cup of tea had spilled on the floor, still puddled beneath a broken mug. A chair was knocked over. Ava's phone lay face down near the couch with its screen spiderwebbed in cracks. A hoodie half hung from the armrest, and a shoe was lying under the coffee table, like it had been kicked off in haste. Lucia's stomach dropped. Her hands trembled. "Ava," she said again, louder now, voice filled with dread. Still nothing. Her legs moved before her mind caught up. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911. "My friend is missing," she said breathlessly to the dispatcher. There was a struggle. "She's not here. Something happened. Please, send someone now." By the time the officers arrived and sealed off the apartment, the sun had risen higher, casting long strips of light across the chaos left behind. Detective Reed arrived not long after, tall and calm in a long gray coat, his brow creased in concentration. He examined the room with surgical precision, taking in the details with sharp, calculating eyes. "No forced entry," he murmured. "No signs of theft. But clear evidence of a struggle." Lucia stood in the hallway, arms crossed tightly around herself, eyes glassy. She wouldn't leave like this, she whispered. She's never late. She never goes anywhere without texting me. I'm telling you, this isn't right. Reed nodded, his tone gentle but firm. Has she mentioned anything unusual lately? Any threats? Someone new in her life? Lucia hesitated, then said, she's been seeing someone. Not romantically. A man she helped, a few nights ago. From the alley. Reed's eyes sharpened. Alexander Quinn? He asked. Lucia blinked. Yes. How did you? I've been following the report, he replied. The alley attack. It didn't sit well with me. Now this. He didn't finish the sentence. He stepped aside, made a call, and waited as the line connected. Halfway across the city, Alexander Quinn stood in his private study. Rain tapped gently against the tall windows, the kind of rhythmic tapping that usually helped him think. But today he was restless, staring blankly at the schematics for a new prosthetic design, his mind drifting to a nurse with tired eyes and a quiet laugh. His assistant entered. Sir, Detective Reed is on the line. It's about Ava Morgan. Alexander didn't ask questions. He took the call. Quinn. Alexander, it's Reed. I'm sorry to say this, but we've got a situation. Ava Morgan is missing. Her apartment showed signs of a struggle. No witnesses. No surveillance footage so far. There was a pause. Not silence, just stillness. Then Alexander said, How long? She didn't report for her shift this morning. We estimate she's been missing for less than 4 hours. We're treating it as an abduction. Alexander's jaw clenched. Every part of him hardened. Send me the details. I'm activating my team. Reed was silent for a moment, then said, We'll find her. Alexander hung up. In a single motion, he turned to Dorian, his security chief, who had already stepped forward as if reading his mind. Get the surveillance nets online. Pull traffic feeds, private security cams, ATM captures, anything within a 3-block radius of Cedar Row. She doesn't vanish without someone seeing it. Dorian nodded. And your personal protocol? Code Black, Alexander said. Until we bring her back. Within minutes, the Quinn estate transformed from quiet sanctuary to a full-scale intelligence hub. Across screens and monitors, Ava's last known movements were traced. Her exit from the building the night before. A brief stop at a corner market. Then static. No footage of her return home. At the same time, Alexander's tech team scoured Ava's smartwatch GPS, finding the final signal just outside her apartment before it blinked off. He stared at the screen. She was taken, he muttered. This wasn't random. Meanwhile, across the city, inside a cold, dim warehouse tucked into the industrial edge of the waterfront, Ava Morgan stirred. The world was dark and distant. Her head pounded with a low, aching throb. Her arms were numb, her wrists bound tightly behind her with rough, biting rope. She blinked. The light overhead was blinding at first. A single bulb swung from a chain, casting moving shadows across the concrete floor. The air smelled like oil, rust, and sweat. She tried to move. The chair creaked beneath her, unsteady but bolted to the floor. Her ankles were bound too. Then a voice. She's awake. Ava turned her head slowly. Her cheek was swollen. Her lips split. In the corner, 2 men stood watching her. One was tall and twitchy, his eyes darting constantly, a snake with nerves frayed to the breaking point. The other was familiar. Dylan. His posture was rigid, arms crossed, avoiding her gaze. He looked as though he wanted to disappear. You're a lot of trouble, you know that? The twitchy man said, walking slowly toward her. All you had to do was walk past. Mind your own business. But no, you had to play the hero. Ava didn't respond. The man crouched in front of her, smiling with teeth too sharp for his face. Well, hero, he hissed, this is what you get. Dylan shifted uncomfortably. She's not part of it, he said under his breath. The man rounded on him. She is now. Ava's voice cracked. Why? She asked. What do you want? The man leaned in. We want Alexander Quinn, and we're going to use you to get to him. Dylan flinched at the name. Ava stared up at them with cold, steady eyes despite the blood on her lip. You're making a mistake, she whispered. The man grinned. Not the first. Won't be the last. He turned away, and Ava closed her eyes, not in surrender, but in focus. Alexander would come. She knew it. Somewhere out there, he was already moving, and that meant she just had to hold on. A little longer. Just a little longer. The hum of the Quinn Estate's command center was no longer calm. It was electric with urgency. Fluorescent monitors flashed streams of data, city maps bloomed with geolocation pings, and a constant murmur of voices filled the room as Alexander Quinn stood at the center of it all, still, focused, and burning with quiet fury. Ava Morgan had been missing for 32 hours. Too long. Alexander's jaw clenched as he stared at the last known GPS signal from her smartwatch. It blinked once more, useless. They'd disabled it within minutes of taking her. But they'd missed something else. "Run the time-stamped overlay again," he said, his voice sharp and low. Dorian, his head of private security, stood beside him. "Already looping." "Wait, there." He pointed at a grainy clip playing across 4 screens. "That van. Black, late model, tinted windows. It parked near her apartment at 6:48 a.m. Ava was last seen heading up the stairwell at 6:45. The van leaves at 6:59. Alexander narrowed his eyes at the footage. As blurry as it was, he could make out the faint outline of a figure, someone pushed, maybe struggling. A hand reached for the glass. Ava's hand. That was all he needed. Cross-reference plate readers. Trace any vehicle of that make and model leaving that zone within a 10-minute radius. Dorian was already working with his team, barking orders, data flying across their screens. But Alexander wasn't still anymore. He was pacing. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with contained power. A volcano just before the eruption. He had lost people before. To greed. To betrayal. But this was different. This was her. Moments later, Dorian called out, "Got something." The van was picked up by a construction site camera on Riverside. Same one pulled into an abandoned shipping warehouse on Pier 19. No exit footage. Alexander's blood went cold. They're still there. We've pinged local authorities. SWAT's en route. ETA 10 minutes. "I'm not waiting 10 minutes, Alexander said, striding out of the room. Dorian followed. "Sir, with respect, you're not going in unarmed." "I'm not going in alone either," Alexander snapped. "Suit the team. Black gear. Silent entry. Let the police have their perimeter. We go through the side." Dorian didn't argue. He knew better. In the rusted skeleton of the Pier 19 warehouse, the air was heavy with sweat and stale metal. Dim light filtered through cracks in the ceiling, painting the floor with fractured stripes. Ava sat, wrists still bound, ankles tethered, heart thudding. Every breath burned her ribs. She was bruised, dehydrated, but conscious. She'd spent 2 nights in that chair, and her limbs felt like concrete. Still, her eyes were clear. She knew time was running out. A door slammed somewhere beyond the shadows. Footsteps. Voices. "They're late." Reese, the twitchy one, was pacing again. "Where the hell is Mark? He said he'd be here an hour ago." "He's coming," Dylan muttered, his back against the wall, arms crossed. But his voice lacked conviction. "Cleanup crew," he said. "You think that means what I think it means." "Shut up, Reese." Ava lifted her head slowly. "Still waiting for your boss to clean up your failure?" she asked, voice rough but cutting. Reese scowled. "You've got a smart mouth for someone about to vanish." "She's not wrong," Dylan muttered. Then louder, "This wasn't the deal." Reese turned on him. "What deal? That we scare the girl? She already saw your face. We're not walking away from this." Dylan looked at Ava then. Her face was pale, but her expression was composed. Not broken. Not begging. "You're still human," she said, voice soft. "You still have a choice." His mouth tightened. "You think he's going to save you?" Reese snapped. "Quinn's probably halfway to a jet by now. People like him don't bleed for people like you." "You're wrong," Ava whispered. "He's coming. I know it." And even as she said it, a low whine rose in the distance. Reese froze. Sirens. Then came the sound of wheels tearing gravel. Shouts in the dark. The flash of red and blue through the cracks in the steel. "No, no, no." Reese spun toward the loading dock. "They found us." "Grab the girl," Dylan said, his voice shaking. "We move now." Reese rushed toward her, pulling out a knife, but Ava twisted in her chair. "Don't touch me." Then came the sound that changed everything. Boom. A door exploded inward. Flashbang. Blinding light. Shouting. Boots pounding across concrete. "Drop your weapons." Hands in the air. Reese staggered back, knife dropping with a clatter. Dylan raised his hands, eyes wide, as black-clad officers stormed through the smoke. And then he was there. Alexander. Rushing into the chaos, eyes scanning, voice cutting through the storm. "Ava." She turned her head toward him just as another officer slashed through the ropes. Her body crumpled forward, and into his arms. "I'm here," he whispered, pulling her close. His voice cracked with emotion. "You're safe now. I've got you." Her arms wrapped around his neck, weak but steady. She was crying now, not from fear, but from release. She buried her face against his chest. "You came. I will always come." Officers swarmed the room, securing Reese and Dylan, who offered no resistance. The echo of handcuffs snapping closed marked the end of something. But for Alexander, everything was beginning again. A paramedic moved toward him, but he waved them off for a moment, still holding Ava like she might disappear again if he let go. She was shaking against him, breath shallow. "I thought I wouldn't see you again," she whispered. "I couldn't lose you." She smiled faintly, even through the tears. "You didn't." They sat there on the concrete floor, surrounded by police radios, the hiss of smoke grenades, and the rising dawn. But in his arms, she was safe, and that was all that mattered. The city didn't sleep easily in the days that followed the raid on the warehouse at Pier 19. Headlines blared from every screen and newspaper stand like alarms. Billionaire targeted in assassination plot. Nurse heroically saved, then kidnapped. Corporate rival behind bars and stunning conspiracy. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a reckoning. On the surface, Alexander Quinn had always appeared untouchable, stoic, reserved, a man with a mind that bent markets and a heart no one could quite pin down. But this story, this attempted erasure of a man too quiet to threaten anyone except through excellence, cracked something open. And when the light poured through, the city saw what had nearly been lost, and who had saved him. Ava Morgan's name became part of every news cycle, even as she remained hidden behind guarded doors, healing slowly in a hospital suite funded quietly by Alexander himself. She declined all interviews. She wasn't interested in fame. She just wanted silence, sleep, and perhaps a few hours without nightmares. But the world outside spun louder with each passing day. The conspiracy unraveled quickly. Dylan, the man who had flinched at cruelty, offered full cooperation to law enforcement in exchange for leniency. His testimony broke the silence surrounding Mr. Mark Renshaw, the sharp-dressed, silver-tongued executive once celebrated as a visionary in Forbes and named Innovator of the Year by Techline just 9 months earlier. Behind closed doors, Mark had harbored something darker than vision. He had built envy into a weapon. For years, he'd seethed under the shadow of Alexander Quinn's influence. Where Quinn created, Mark acquired. Where Quinn protected, Mark manipulated. But no matter how many companies Mark bought or how many boards he dominated, he could never surpass the man he pretended to admire, until he decided to erase him. The courtroom was full on the morning of the trial. Reporters buzzed like bees behind barricades. The prosecution had everything. GPS logs, warehouse blueprints, burner phones, and most damning of all, video footage pulled from the shattered remains of Reese's discarded device. In one clip, recorded 2 days before Ava's abduction, Mr. Mark's voice could be heard in chilling clarity. "He won't see it coming. Just make sure she disappears too. No witnesses. No stories." The jury barely blinked as the audio played. A hush fell so deep you could hear clothing shift. Mark didn't flinch. He sat in the defendant's seat like a man in a board meeting, cool and measured, as if he still believed he could talk his way out of it. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was judgment. In his closing argument, the district attorney held nothing back. This was not an act of impulse, he declared, pacing before the jury. It was deliberate, calculated. He didn't just try to eliminate a competitor, he tried to erase a human being. And when Ms. Morgan intervened, her life became expendable. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the cold heart of this case. It took the jury less than 4 hours to convict. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and unlawful coercion. Mark showed no emotion as the verdict was read. No remorse. Only silence. But outside the courthouse, a different story played out. One of relief, in a city ready to turn a page. And high above it all, in a private wing of St. Jude Memorial, Ava Morgan lay in bed, her arm bandaged and bruises slowly fading, her body fighting to mend. She had seen parts of herself she hadn't known existed, strength she didn't know she had, fear she couldn't explain, and a will that refused to break. Alexander came every afternoon without fail. He never stayed long enough to overwhelm her, nor short enough to feel like an obligation. He brought flowers, never roses, but cheerful blooms, sunflowers, daisies, lavender. Sometimes he brought pastries from her favorite bakery or books she had once mentioned in passing. And always, he brought himself, guard lowered, walls cracked, voice softer than anyone would expect from a man whose name carried stock prices. This time, he entered with a quiet knock and a book tucked under his arm. "You're early," Ava said, lifting her head from the pillow. "I needed the quiet," he replied, taking his seat beside her bed. Courtroom was chaos. Reporters at every door. She offered him a tired smile. "Did you wear one of your secret disguises?" He raised an eyebrow. "You think I have disguises? I think you have everything." His smile softened. "You're giving me too much credit. Today, I barely remembered to comb my hair." She glanced at his perfectly swept silver locks and laughed. It felt good to laugh. It felt human again. He placed the book on her nightstand and leaned back in the chair. "It's over now," he said quietly. The jury didn't hesitate. "Good," she murmured. He didn't deserve hesitation. Alexander studied her for a long moment, then reached into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small silver object, worn but carefully polished. A flashlight. Her flashlight. Ava blinked. "You kept it." "I did. Found it in the alley, after the police cleared the scene. It still works." He clicked it once, and a soft beam glowed on the ceiling above them. "That light," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "cut through a night that was meant to bury me. That was no accident." Ava swallowed, suddenly overwhelmed. "You were never just a nurse," he said, turning the flashlight off and placing it in her hand. "You were my light in the alley." Tears stung her eyes before she could stop them. "You don't have to say things like that," she said softly. "I know." He reached out, gently brushing her knuckles with his fingertips. "But I want to." They sat like that for a while, the soft beep of the heart monitor keeping rhythm in the background. No grand declarations. No rush to define what they were. Just two people suspended in a moment that might not have existed at all. Had one flashlight not been pointed, had one woman not chosen courage over comfort. As twilight bled through the window, Ava turned her gaze toward the fading city skyline. "Do you think they'll forget?" Alexander shook his head. "The city remembers what it wants." "But I won't forget. Ever." She looked back at him, her expression calm and clear. "Neither will I." Outside, another news alert rolled across television screens. The world was already preparing for the next scandal, the next drama. But in one room, far from the cameras and flashbulbs, the real story was still unfolding, quietly, bravely, and without expectation. It was the story of survival, of truth laid bare and darkness confronted, and of the kind of light that doesn't flicker when the night closes in, but shines even brighter. The day of her discharge came with the first real warmth of spring. Sunlight spilled across the hospital floor in soft golden sheets, stretching through half-closed blinds and catching the edge of Ava Morgan's bed. She had risen before the nurse arrived with her chart, already dressed in the simplest clothes she owned. A navy t-shirt and faded jeans that felt almost foreign after a week in hospital gowns. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped in her lap, heart fluttering with a quiet storm of emotions. Relief, anxiety, grief she hadn't processed yet, gratitude so deep it felt like an ache. It didn't feel real, not the trial, not the cameras, not the verdict, not the strange, quiet fame that now hovered around her like dust in sunlight. But outside, a new chapter was waiting. When the nurse finally returned, it was with a smile and a soft touch to Ava's shoulder. "You've got someone waiting downstairs," she said. He brought a lot." Ava blinked. "Alexander." The nurse nodded. "That's him." She took a deep breath, grabbed her small bag, and stepped into the hallway. Every step felt surreal. No machines beeping, no first stand rolling beside her. Just the quiet patter of her own sneakers against the linoleum floor and the pounding of her heart that grew louder with each floor she descended. The main entrance doors opened with a whoosh, letting in the scent of cherry blossoms and fresh pavement. And there he was. Alexander Quinn stood waiting by the curb, dressed down in a crisp white shirt and navy blazer, no tie, hands tucked casually in his pockets. His salt and pepper hair caught the light, and for a man who had been through a trial, a scandal, and a near-death experience, he looked peaceful. But he wasn't holding flowers. Instead, in his left hand, he held a set of car keys. In the other, a thin leather folder. Ava slowed, confused. "You're not seriously about to hand me paperwork right now, are you?" He smiled, walking toward her. not paperwork. Possibilities. He held out the keys first. This is for you. Ava hesitated. Alex. It's not what you think, he said softly, still smiling. It's not a favor, or repayment, or pity. It's a gift from someone who owes you more than he can say. She accepted the keys slowly, turning them over in her hand. The fob glinted with a silver emblem, a brand she couldn't pronounce but had definitely admired from afar. You didn't have to. I didn't, he cut in. But I wanted to. Then he handed her the folder. She opened it and froze. The first page was a deed. Her name was printed at the top in bold, elegant letters. Ava Morgan. The address sat beneath it. She didn't recognize the street name, but she knew the neighborhood. Safe, clean, near a park and a school. A quiet part of the city she had once daydreamed about living in when things weren't so heavy, when life wasn't so hard. A house, she breathed. I toured it myself, Alexander said. It has a front porch, a little garden, a sunroom that gets morning light. I thought you might like that. Ava stared at the paper, then at him. You bought me a house? He nodded. You spent your whole life taking care of people. Working nights. Moving from one rented box to another. You deserve more than gratitude, Ava. You deserve peace. She shook her head slowly, trying to speak, but words crumbled before they reached her mouth. I can't accept. Yes, you can, he said, stepping closer. You can. Because this isn't charity. This isn't about debt. This is about honoring a moment that changed both our lives. A silence fell between them. Cars passed in the distance. A bird chirped somewhere in a blooming tree. The city moved on around them, unaware that two lives were rewiring themselves in the space of a single heartbeat. Finally, Ava whispered, I don't know what to say. Then don't, he said. Let me show you. He gestured to a sleek black car parked just across the street, hers now, apparently. She followed him to it on legs that still felt unsure, the keys in her hand like something stolen. The ride was quiet, peaceful. Alexander didn't try to fill the silence. He didn't need to. He simply sat beside her, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel, eyes focused on the road ahead. His presence was enough, warm, steady, familiar. When they arrived, Ava stared through the window at the house in disbelief. It was perfect. Single story. Pale stone exterior. A navy door with a brass knocker in the shape of a lion. The garden in front was small but blooming tulips, lavender, and something yellow she couldn't name. A mailbox stood beside the front steps, shiny and untouched. A home. Her home. They walked up together. He opened the front door but paused at the threshold. I didn't furnish it yet, he said. I figured you'd want to make it yours. She nodded, stepping inside. Hardwood floors. Fresh paint. Sunlight pouring through the windows. The kitchen glistened like something from a magazine. The bedroom down the hall had French doors that opened onto a tiny fenced backyard. I don't. She turned in a slow circle, unable to finish the thought. I don't deserve all this. You do, Alexander said behind her. She turned to face him. I can't keep letting you change my life like this. His voice was gentle. Then let me change other lives too. He reached into his coat once more and handed her a second folder. This, he said, is what I'm most proud of. Inside was a proposal, a mission statement, and a name written in stylized font across the top. The Ava Morgan Initiative. Ava stared at it, lips parting. What is this? A foundation, Alexander explained. In your name. Fully funded, fully independent. Its purpose is simple: support emergency responders, nurses, and women in crisis. Especially the ones who don't have a voice or a lifeline. She flipped through the pages, trying to understand. Counseling services. Scholarships. Emergency housing. Career transition aid. You inspired this, he said. You made me remember what matters. People. Not just numbers. Not headlines or profit or legacy. Just people, doing hard things in silence, hoping someone will see them. She looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. You already did, he replied, voice thickening. The night you saved me. She dropped the folder gently on the kitchen counter and crossed the space between them. Then, without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around him and held on. It wasn't a romantic embrace, not yet, but it was intimate, deep, the kind of hug that said everything words never could. He held her tightly in return, one hand cradling the back of her head. You've changed my life, she whispered into his shoulder. Alexander closed his eyes. You changed mine first. They stayed like that for a while, in the middle of the kitchen of a house filled with sunlight and possibility. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was sacred. And as Ava finally pulled away and looked around, her keys in one hand, a future she hadn't asked for but had quietly earned now stretching before her, she smiled for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Not the smile she gave to patients. Not the one she used to hide fatigue. A real one. Because this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The city pulsed with evening light, alive with the low hum of buses, laughter, and shopkeepers pulling down awnings. Neon signs blinked gently above coffee houses and corner markets. In the heart of this rhythm, tucked between two aging brick buildings, sat an alley that once meant nothing to anyone. Now it meant everything. The streetlight above the alley had been replaced with a modern LED fixture that glowed with unwavering steadiness. Beneath it, a city-installed security camera panned slowly from side to side, its presence a quiet sentinel to what had once nearly gone unnoticed. But it wasn't the camera or the light that caught people's attention these days. It was the mural. Painted across the weathered brick wall in deep, vivid strokes was the figure of a nurse, not cartoonish or glorified, but human. She stood in profile, hair pulled back into a ponytail, her scrubs loose but clean, her posture steady. In her hand, she held a flashlight. The beam stretched across the wall, illuminating shadowed faces, reaching for something unseen. Above her, in graceful white script, were 4 simple words. Be the light. No artist name. No signature. Just a statement. Tonight, beneath that mural, Ava Morgan stood with a small candle cup between her hands. The wind was gentle, cool. The flame wavered but did not go out. She lowered it carefully, setting it just below the mural, beside the base of the wall where others had left tokens, folded notes, tiny tea lights, even a pair of white nursing clogs, gently worn and respectfully placed. The ground was still the same cracked concrete from that night. The rusted drain cover in the corner still hummed when the subway ran beneath it. The memory was intact, but the space was transformed. Revered. Protected. Ava stood in silence. She didn't need to cry anymore. She had already shed tears in hospital beds and quiet rooms, at court hearings, and alone in the shower. What remained now wasn't grief. It wasn't even fear. It was stillness. It was gratitude. She took one slow breath, then closed her eyes. The city around her kept moving. She thought of how it had felt to step into this alley the first time. The crackling nerves. The blinding flashlight. The 2 shadows looming above a man who didn't yet have a name to her. She had been so tired. Just a nurse heading home. One wrong turn away from safety. One decision away from silence. But she hadn't walked away. And that had changed everything. From above, a soft narration began, not in voice, but in thought, in energy, in the quiet intimacy of reflection. One act of courage can ignite change in ways we may never fully understand. Ava Morgan didn't wear a cape. She wore scrubs, walked home alone, and didn't look away. In doing so, she saved a life. And in the end, found a new one of her own. As the narration faded, so too did Ava's stillness. She turned away from the mural and began walking toward the city square just 2 blocks down. Her pace was calm, purposeful. She no longer walked like someone hiding in a uniform. She moved like someone rooted. Steady. The event had already begun when she arrived. String lights crisscrossed overhead in the plaza, casting warm halos over the crowd. Folding chairs were arranged in rows, laughter rising as children danced between them. Booths lined the sidewalk, some run by volunteers from local hospitals, others offering hot cocoa, hand-knit scarves, or pamphlets for mental health support. And at the center of it all stood a small stage. A banner above it read, "The Ava Morgan Initiative, Community Night, honoring everyday bravery." Ava smiled faintly. She hadn't wanted her name on it, had fought against it, even. But Alexander had insisted. "You're not the spotlight," he had said. "You're the lamp. Let them see you glow." She moved through the crowd quietly. Heads turned, smiles widened. People nodded in greeting, not like they were meeting a celebrity, but like they were seeing someone who had quietly changed the world just by refusing to look away. Ava stopped by a booth handing out reflective keychains shaped like flashlights. A little girl offered her one with shy hands. "It's for you," the child said. "Mama said you help people like superheroes do." Ava knelt, her heart warm. "Superheroes are everywhere," she whispered. "Sometimes they just wear name tags." The girl beamed. A few minutes later, she reached the front row. Alexander was already there, standing just behind the podium. He wore no suit today, just a black sweater and jeans, a lanyard around his neck that said volunteer. He turned when he saw her, his eyes softening. You came. Wouldn't miss it. I was worried, he said, stepping forward. The alley, was it too much? No, she replied. It was just enough. A flicker of something unspoken passed between them. She looked toward the stage, then to the crowd, then back at him. This isn't about me, Alex. This is about something bigger. I know, he said. But it started with you. He stepped aside and motioned toward the mic. They're waiting. Ava stared at the podium. A year ago, she would have hidden from it. Even 6 months ago, she'd have smiled and stepped away, letting someone else take the microphone. But not tonight. She moved toward it slowly, her boots clicking gently against the wood. She looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, most not. Nurses in scrubs, firefighters in uniform, teenagers in hoodies, grandmothers in headscarves. She didn't need a speech. She spoke like she was talking to a patient at 3 a.m., in the kind of quiet that feels safe. I didn't set out to become anything, she began. I was just walking home. A hush fell across the plaza. That's the thing about moments. They don't give you warnings. They don't ask if you're ready. They arrive, and you choose who you're going to be. She paused, her hand gripping the edge of the podium gently. That night, I made a choice. I chose not to look away, not because I'm brave, but because someone needed help. And deep down, I hoped someone would do the same for me if I was ever in their place. A few people nodded, eyes glistening. This city is full of quiet heroes, she continued. People who answer phones in crisis lines, who walk tired legs through double shifts, who stay behind to clean up when no one else wants to, who speak up when staying silent would be easier. She took a breath. This initiative, this space, it's for them. For you. You don't have to have a title to matter. You don't have to wear a cape to make a difference. Sometimes, all it takes is a flashlight, a heartbeat, a moment. The applause was soft at first, then built. People stood. Some cried. And Ava? She just smiled. As the night deepened and the stars slowly lit up the sky, the event continued. Live music, free meals, laughter that echoed through the streets. But when it came time for the final image, when the cameras pulled back, rising above the city's rooftops, above the glinting lights and the humming roads, they returned one last time to the alley. Now lit, now protected, and on the wall, illuminated by a flickering candle at its base, the mural of a nurse holding a flashlight remained, untouched by time. A soft, melodic soundtrack played beneath the final shot, and the words appeared, fading in, as if whispered across the sky, inspired by quiet heroes everywhere. The screen went black, but the light stayed. If you enjoyed Ava Morgan's inspiring journey and the powerful bond she shared with Alexander Quinn, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more meaningful stories. What did you think of how it all ended? Was justice served? Did Ava get the peace she deserved? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us how this story made you feel, and rate it out of 10. We'd also love to know where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. Thank you for being part of this storytelling journey. Stay tuned for more real, emotional, and unforgettable stories that leave a mark.